Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today is a joy for me because I get a chance to hear, and you get a chance to hear my father talk. I have passed out a flyer that has his biographical statement in it, so I won't read all of that for you. And we are recording this session, so you can order the DVD at the Ebenezer table over near registration. Dr. Lorenzo Lynch is the fourth generation preacher in the family. That's as far back as we were able to trace with slavery. He comes as a pastor, preacher, more so as a prophet. The prophets always stood to speak truth to power. And the prophets always spoke words that were very seldom enjoyed by power. 1950, he accepted the call to preach under my late grandfather, Augustus C. Lynch. And he's been serving, he's been active, he's been moving across the years. I was trying to figure out what he would allow us to do on this afternoon. So I came up with the idea of a brief interview to ask him to help us to see in 2010 what's the church like versus 1950. Times have changed, we understand, culture has changed, but the church has changed. Christ is still the same. Still no other name under heaven whereby men might be saved. Still only one way, through Jesus Christ. That will never change. But the pew has changed. And the pulpit has changed. So as we go forward, I'm just going to ask one or two questions and let him talk. Those of you who know him know he has always said whatever was on his mind. So we're looking forward to some insights on today. Dr. Lynch, what was life like in 1950 when you started preaching?
In 1950, when I started preaching, I made some notes so I wouldn't talk all day. It wouldn't talk all over the place. It was like this. The churches were what we call one Sunday worship churches. One pastor had several churches. And one pastor had 5 churches sometime and 4 churches most of the time. There were exceptions. In some of the cities or towns, one pastor had one church. So the pastor was primarily a visiting minister. The superintendent, the missionary president, and the sexton were the pastors. If there was something the sexton didn't want to do, he said the Lord wasn't for it. That meant he was too lazy to do it. They met in the bathroom. They met in the gardens. They met uptown. And when they came to conference or business meeting, the meeting was over. You could talk until you were blue in the face, but that you were just talking. Because they had already decided what they were going to do. So they made announcements. We're going to do so-and-so, and we're going to do so-and-so, and we're going to do so-and-so, and we ain't going to do so-and-so. So church like then, that's about all I would say about the congregations. The worship was the same from Sunday to Sunday. The hymns were about the same from Sunday to Sunday. They were threesome. A praise service of about 30 minutes, and then a formal worship service, and they had scripture and prayer in both services. Why did you need scripture and prayer in the same building on the same day, almost at the same hour? It was because church by the devotion folk was not church by the formal worshipers. The praise service, they shouted. And whoever shouted in the praise service slept in the formal service. All right. That devotional, that's one service. The formal service was one service. Many of them had no piano, no music. They sang. I did a revival out from Raleigh. Wasn't too long ago after I started preaching. I never seen and heard so many men singing so well in all the days of my life. Their music was made by their feet. And when you sang, you could hear the feet. They all got carpet on this floor, but we had no carpet. Our seat was not carpet. Our seat was cracks. And you could hear the feet on the floor. Service 1 was praise service. Service 2 was formal service. Pastor conducted that one. Service 3 was outdoors. Outdoors. Sometimes the soul whiskey outdoors. I hope y'all excuse me. I'm just telling it like it was. Threesome. I was a member of this church. My wife was a member of Baboon Baptist Church. And I worship. See, that's one Sunday. The second Sunday. The third Sunday, I'd worship at the church near me or that I liked. So I was a member of 3 churches. Y'all don't hear me, do you? And I was just as loyal to one church as I was to the other. Mm-hmm. A rally in my wife's church was my rally too. Attendance at my wife's church was my attendance too. I don't want to go too far on one question.
How did you travel? Did you have a car when you started, or how did you get from town to town?
My late father had a car of sorts, but you better not carry it too far. So I went all over Warren County, Halifax County, Nash County, Edgecombe County, Pitt County, and a few others. But I would go to the town by bus, and a deacon or a member of the deacon's family would meet me at the bus stop. And the time to go bring me back to the bus stop. And if I preached in Nash County, there was a place I stayed. And if I didn't, I had a fight. One Saturday night in the Tar River Association, they said, "Oh, who need a place to stay, stand." Well, I stood. Well, Deacon Cooper, a deacon at Social Union Baptist Church, said, "Reverend Lynch, sit down. You got a place. You staying with me." So, free of charge, I stayed in several homes. I didn't have to preach at that church. If I was preaching in that area, they understood I would stay in their homes. So I was a member of several families. I was in my teens, remember. I was in my teens. Wasn't even 20 years old. This was before college I'm talking about.
You talk about revivals a lot. I remember different format of revival. Many times now we'll have 3 nights of worship when you were doing revivals, when you first started, what was the format of the revival, the day and the night and the afternoon?
The revival format when I started varied. Some sections was day and night revival. Other sections was night only. I preached revival in my teens, 10 o'clock service, 2 o'clock service, and night service, 3 sermons per night. I've also preached in the Joe Louis, Max Mellon revivals, 2 preachers. Y'all don't hear me, do you? The Lord wasn't in it. They sat around to see who could outbox the other one. And of course, I had a little devil in me even when I started preaching. See, if you started on Monday, had to go through Friday, you better stay low key till about Thursday night. All right. And your competition would just preach all over the place. Well, where was the devil in me? By staying low key, I was building up sympathy. All right, all right, all right. About Thursday night, I turned loose. Didn't happen one more day. Didn't happen one more day. But you get started way too soon, as many preachers have. You hoarse by Thursday night. So I had a little devil in me. I'd hold back. People would send word, "You better preach, boy, you better preach." I said to myself, after a while, night and day, day and night, people would come from up north who used to belong to the churches for revival. If it were night and day, there was a meal at lunchtime. If it was morning, afternoon, and night, there was a meal at lunchtime and a meal after the 2 o'clock session. People brought food and you ate out of the trunks. Sometimes they made a shelter, and as you ate, the trash would fall out of the ceiling. Don't tell them I said it, but anyway, it varied from place to place. You all have, I built 3 or 4 additions to the buildings that I served. Mm-hmm. Classrooms, dining room, and so forth. But I didn't find them that way. The church building that I served had a place to worship and 2 side buildings, room. One room to curse out the preacher and another room to prepare Holy Communion. Y'all think I'm lying. I'm not lying. One more thing about revivals. They varied as to how you joined. In some sessions, you came to the front seat. They called that the ancient seat, some mourner's bench. And they sang and sang and prayed.
I've seen that.
And when you jump up, they say you got religion. But the pastor was busy one day, and if anybody accept Christ, about 10 children got up, but they didn't shout. So that evening, they got up and made those children go back to the bench and get religion all over again. Reverend Hart, then I'm going to move on. P.A. Bishop married sisters. I know y'all going to get mad. Reverend Hart, P.A. Bishop had much religion. Excuse me, y'all. Please forgive me. I knew both of them. I succeeded Reverend Hart at at Basil Creek Baptist Church. The bishop was pastor, Hart was the evangelist, and this old elder brother wouldn't join, came to the mourners bench every night. Make a long story short, Reverend Hart, would you accept Jesus, my brother? Stuck a pin in this brother. This brother jumped up and ran all up in the pulpit, knocked the flowers off. Now that was hard. There's no more devilish a preacher ever put on a robe than H.H. Hart.
In 2010, we hear a lot of theological preaching or non-theological preaching called health and wealth, the prosperity gospel. What were some of the preaching themes of the 1950s as you got started preaching?
The themes were too narrow. Salvation, going to heaven, escaping hell, what we call living right. But what we call living right was too narrow. If you didn't drink whiskey, if you didn't gamble, if you didn't curse, if you didn't steal money, you were living right. But Jesus said it takes more than that. So our themes were narrow themes, too narrow. Those were our themes. We didn't preach much on the sin of the community or the sin of the nation or the sin of omission as well as commission, neighbor or sin against neighbor. Our themes were too narrow.
What were some of the preaching themes during the civil rights movement when you served in Greensboro during the sit-ins?
Well, during the sit-ins, we had tough themes. The theme was how to stand up for your rights without getting angry or without becoming the victim. That was one of your themes. The other theme was the sin of oppression. Whether it was against men, against women, adults against children, it was a sin. Another theme was the reinterpreting of accepted thinking. For an example, when Noah cursed one of the sons, the theme was this was not God cursing, this was a drunk man's cursing. And that a drunk man's curse didn't go very far. Or I'll just give that as an example, as a theme in social gospel. More.
All right. We witness today many new organized churches. Some come out of church conflict. Some come as call them church plant. Some come as just a new ministry being birthed. But from the angle of church conflict, it's 2010, but is church conflict new? Is this something we've seen across the years? Conflict, pulpit and pew, and conflict, pulpit and pulpit between preachers.
Conflict is not new it is done faster today than days of old because we move faster, communication is faster, and people team up and connect faster. But so far as what brings about conflict in new congregation, one is egotism, a worship of self. Another one is self-centeredness. Another one is a worshiping jots and tittles. Take a little piece of scripture and build a faith on it. That brings about a lot of splits. The other thing about splits is the same is a little different than yesterday. Yesterday, people stood their ground more than they do today. In Detroit, about 5 or more years ago, a man raped a woman in openness in the presence of other folk. And enough people stood by to have jumped on that man and overcome him, but they did not. So a Princeton university professor, I think it was professor of sociology, found some of those folks. So why didn't you? All of you could have jumped on him and whipped him. So well, I was waiting on this brother, and he didn't make a move, so I didn't make a move. So, well, mister, why didn't you? So I was waiting on this brother, I thought sure he was going to jump on him, but he didn't make a move. There's something about today's culture where we got better houses, better clothing, better cars, but we are more cowardly than we've been. The older folks said, I ain't, and you is, this and that. But you couldn't hoodwink them as quick as you can today's folk. They saw through trash. They saw through littleness. They saw through Satan. They saw through a whole lot of stuff. They saw through it. Now this book has really shocked me. It says the hidden system behind the fights, church conflict. This man argues, and I used to not agree with him. I mean, 2 people in your church fight. 98% got the head in the hands, head between the knees, running, Brer Rabbit, run with the bush shakes. He said, whoever fights may work at the ABC store, may be a barber, may be a lawyer, may not even be a member of your congregation. But they call the shots. And folk don't move. We had a boy in Princeville. He had more education than the average members. And when the deacons met, after they met, they'd go to him, and he'd mark out what they could carry out and what they couldn't. Y'all don't hear me, do you? You remember the floods in Princeville? He had a better house than anybody else, but caskets out of the grave were washed through his house, and he was scared to go back in there evermore. They said the bigger you are, the harder you fall. What they say? So just a few folk. Now, I want to mention one more about splitting up. Clergy killers. They said preachers today got more ulcers, more hiccups, more high blood pressure than ever, because we have allowed folk to come to the front who never been born again. And we've allowed them to stay in power. And rather than helping to serve the Lord and lift up fallen humanity, they are preacher kickers, preacher chokers. But they said, don't stop there. They're choking organist, they'll choke a Sunday school teacher, they'll choke a deacon, they'll choke anybody who stands in their way. So the splits come that we allow the devil to run away with the wagon. When the elderly folk wouldn't follow him, they said, this is the Lord's house, brother, not yours. Not yours. All right.
Talking about church conflict, one of the issues of conflict today among Baptists is the role of women in church. But I remember your church being the first in either 70 or 71 to ordain women deacons. What have you seen as the benefit from women deacons in helping manage church conflict?
Well, I've seen the women deacons versus the men deacons. The women deacons have more of a sympathy for peace, more of a heart for peace. And I've also seen the women to try to speak more calmly in a conflict. More calmly in conflict. They try to speak calmly to bring the situation under control. I've also seen women try to vote more with the objectives of the congregation and the objectives of the kingdom, and being less pulled off, you understand, by every wind and every breath.
Yeah.
So I've seen a positive side to women deacons. I must say, though, the biggest fight I've had in 60 years was when we put 13 women on the board of deacons. I must also say the biggest fighter of it were women. Are y'all listening?
What would you say, looking at 60 years, was your biggest mistake?
Well, I'll mention more than one. My biggest mistake was Deotis Roberts, James Deotis Roberts. Used to pastor in Tarboro, North Carolina. Anybody here from Tarboro?
Yeah. Saw Pastor here. Yeah.
All right, and we'll be here from, yes, somebody raised their hand. Well, it wasn't St. Luke, it may have been Eastern Star, I can't remember. And then he taught. He went to Hartford Theological Seminary, and then he taught at Shaw University. I was one of the students. He said, Lynch, follow me to Edinburgh. Y'all think this is a lot of, I said, is Edinburgh up north or west? Where is Edinburgh? You know, ignorance is something, isn't it? Ignorance is something, y'all. He said, it's in Scotland. He went to Edinburgh, got a doctorate of philosophical theology. Y'all know about him?
Yeah. I know Mendez now.
Mendez, you know about him.
Yeah.
One of my biggest mistakes was I didn't follow Deotis Roberts to Edinburgh. All right. I said, I'm going to stay in the pastorate. He begged me not to give my life to the parish ministry. Are y'all listening? If I had to make a bargain with the den of thieves and a congregation, I'd make it with the den of thieves. Excuse me, y'all. Y'all don't hear me, do you? Huh? Some deacons put their arms around me and said, boy, you got no security, you got no future. No, buy you some real estate. And I own today 15 or 20 rental houses. They said the day will come when you're going to need them. He said the word of our people can't be counted upon. And that's what they do. More than one deacon told me that. The deacon knew, just like Roberts, that a bunch of church folk can hardly be counted upon. He'll fight just as quickly, he'll get mad just as quickly as he'll fight. And regardless what he signed as a contract, when he gets mad, he disregards it. And it doesn't take much to make him mad. My second mistake, I was in graduate school at Boston University, working on a doctorate, and sold myself. One of the professors he begged me not to do it. I took a church in Greensboro, Providence Baptist Church in Greensboro, and said I could finish this doctorate. And I got tied up in building churches and making peace and so forth and so on. Time just flew. Professor said, son, if you ever leave here, you'll never be back. I came back, but not. I should have stayed. I'm talking about mistakes. I'm talking about mistakes. My third mistake, and I'll move from this subject, in a church fight, I thought peace would make peace. But dealing with our people, peace won't make peace. Now, according to the expert, peace will make peace with the peaceful. But the 3 or 4 folk who are really making the trouble, and most time they're undercover, most time they're under cloud, most time they don't come out, most time they camouflage. So I should have used war.
God help us.
Talking about mistakes. Kindness is all right with kind people. But it's not all right with the devil who sits on the front seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, Jesus whipped him out of the temple, didn't he? And Jesus said, I've come not to bring something but a sword, didn't he? He said, when I sent you out, I sent you one way. Now, if you got a sword, use it. If you don't, go get you one. All right.
What advice would you give? Because a crowd this large, somebody is in a church fight here. All right. Either a pastor's in one, or somebody's on the deacon board or trustee board, or this many churches, you can't come together and not have represented. What advice would you give to the clergy for surviving church fight and the laity in the midst of that church being in that conflict?
First advice I would give both: understand that fight. If you don't understand it, you do a lot of, Paul said, something not as beaten the air, you beat the air. Understand the anatomy of a church fight. 95% of your folk never fight. And when a deacon come to you and say, Reverend, the people are complaining, that's a lie. He's complaining. Clergy killers, I mentioned that. Understand it. Understand the nature of your opposition. Thirdly, there's a book called Antagonists in the Church. It's a good book. It'll tell you it's not the church, it's just 2 or 3. It'll tell you their tactics. One of their tactics is they are chanters. He's too short. He's too tall. He's too fat. He's too skinny. He preached too long. He preached too short. I can't hear what he said. He hollers too loud.
Chants.
Chanting. They're trying to pick up support. They're trying to pick up support. Ignore that chant. You've got to prepare people. One thing I learned, but I learned it too late. If you're the captain of a ship and a storm come up and you go to sleep, don't be surprised if the ship goes astray. Brother Pastor, you can't fight it by yourself, but God knows you can't desert the fight. You got to stay in the fight. Can't get mad, but you can't release. I thought if you teach them and show them, they'll stand up. No, you got to stand up. And they'll stand with you. Mm-hmm. Now, the sad thing about today's fight is, I'll give you one illustration. Some of you were there when they put Dr. Jackson out of the National Baptist Convention. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You know why they put Jackson out? His lieutenants were in the grave. If Jackson's, I knew Hampton from San Diego. I knew him personally. I preached for him. I met Coleman from Connecticut. Yeah. And I could go on and on. Jackson's lieutenants died. And when they came for him, he had no army.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of North Carolina mutual folk were in that last church I served. And they had bossed everybody. And they'd lose in the membership meeting. They said, what happened? Y'all didn't win last night. Lynch's army. Get you an army.
Yes, sir.
If the devil can meet, the righteous can meet. If the devil can confer, the peace folk can confer. Mm-hmm. All right.
Wednesday of this week, we will have elections within the General Baptist State Convention, which will prove to be an interesting day. Not looking at the election of this Wednesday, but as you look back at the General Baptist from when you started working and pastoring and what have you, what presidents do you remember and what tenures stand out from across the years?
Well, I remember Paul Bishop. No bigger tyrant, boss, dictatorial than Bishop. Bishop and I are from the same part of the country. I got nothing against him. He didn't bit more believe in democracy than a chicken. I remember J.B. Humphrey. J.B. Humphrey, I think, was a democracy-minded president. He was no baby when he became president. I helped draft him. So he did have an energy problem. He didn't have the energy to do as much as he would like to do. There was a president we didn't understand. We didn't understand Reverend Turner from Lumberton. Turner knew this convention needed to be turned around.
Mm-hmm.
He knew that. Diggs knew that. We're in Charlotte, right?
Yeah.
Where was Diggs? Mayfield?
Mayfield.
Diggs knew that. So I remember Turner trying to, he wasn't after anybody. He was painted as being after Craig. Craig was no saint. Excuse me, y'all. I was chairman of a budget committee of the General Baptist Church for 12 years. So when I say he was no saint, I'm speaking primarily of the money, and I'm not dreaming, and I'm not drunk. I know what I'm talking about. So I remember Bishop because of his arrogancy. I remember Dr. Humphrey because of his humility, his democracy, kindness. And I remember Turner, who tried to reform the convention, and God knows he had his hands full. I think Reverend Ed was able to lead this convention with less turmoil than any president I can recall. Some of you might remember Reverend Edwards was president. He knew how to ward off a fight. He did. And working with the convention, that's necessary.
As we look at ministry in 60 years, for the clergy, how important 2010 is education for the clergy?
Education is very important for the clergy to go to seminary, to stay in school, but stay out of these fundamentalist schools. These fundamentalists founded slavery, these fundamentalists kept slavery, these fundamentalists fought Lincoln, these fundamentalists stole our labor after the Emancipation Proclamation. Fundamentalists. This book, Slavery by Another Name by Blackman. After Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation, they go out on the street corner. So what you doing up here? You say, I came to buy so-and-so. You got the money? Yeah, they take that. So since you ain't got no money, you're loitering. They lock you up. The magistrate was his cousin or his brother or his grandfather. Lumber mill, steel mill, road workers would come to the sheriff and the magistrate, same person most times, and pay your fine, which you were never told. You didn't know what you were up there for. And I'm not going into the detail, but in this picture, in this book, it got a picture of black men with shackles on their legs. Once you got on the farm, once you got in a lumber mill, you couldn't leave. You were shackled. You worked for 10 and 12 years for nothing. In other words, after the Emancipation Proclamation, the white man got free labor.
Yeah.
As late as 1901, paid you nothing. That's what a fundamentalist will do to you. Stay out of his schools. He got the Bible in his hand and hell in his heart. He got one or two scriptures, but it takes more than one or two scriptures to make it. His view of the church is materialistic. His view of the church is worldly. It's not spiritual. He believes in individual salvation. Jesus taught, try to save the world, the kingdom to come.
The kingdom, yeah.
Not individual salvation. So stay out of these fundamentalist schools. Another thing to do, education for the clergy, read on your own. This is Cruton's Complete Concordance. If you want to look up something, you can look it up through this concordance in the Bible. Gospel parallels, Mark, Matthew, and Luke, put right beside each other. If the same thing is told by all three, they're right beside. If it's just told by one, study, brethren, on our own. Then study something besides the Bible. This is American Heart Association cookbook.
That's right.
Stay out the undertaker's shop. A bath costs too much in the undertaker's shop. You can take a free bath, but when he bathes you, it's $1,000. The New Testament in 4 versions. King James. Don't have more glass. Phillips.
Yeah, New English.
New English.
And revised.
Revised, thank you. It compares the scriptures, the same text told in 4 different ways. I also got Harper's Bible Dictionary with me for looking up words, places, dates. But one of the shameful things about me when I started preaching, I knew nothing about Abington Bible Commentary. Abington Bible Commentary was published 50 years before I started preaching. And I knew nothing about it. I was preaching 10 years before I knew about it. It's a shame. I'm talking about my shame, not yours. My shame. All I had was a Bible. That was my study book. But you need more than the Bible. You need, what did the man ask? It said, ask, how can I? Except somebody do what? Guides me. And we need guidance. Study politics.
That's right.
Don't stay home this November, for God's sake.
Yeah.
These devilish white folk are mad.
Yeah.
When they said we want our country back,
They mean it.
Franklin Littell, PhD in church history from Yale, was speaking for me about 40 years ago, Human Relations Institute. He got so filled up he had to stop. He was speaking about folk in the name of the Lord wanting to go back. He said they want to go back when blacks knew their masters, back when women knew their places, back when half of the church got drunk on the church ground. We don't want to go back. Hell, we've been back. We've lived back. Now, why we want to go back? Gracious, it was tough back there.
Yeah.
So now, oh yeah, while I'm on it, then I'm going to stop yakking. Barack is not the first black president.
Tell him, black man. Tell it.
Barack is the second black president of the United States of America. Why you don't know that? Because your teachers didn't think it's worth telling, and they're not proud of a black man being president. The first president of America was black.
That's right. Go ahead.
John Hanson.
Yes, sir.
But we were under the Articles of Confederation.
That's right.
The Articles of Confederation in America was in effect 5 or 7 years before the Constitution was adopted.
That's right. That's right.
George Washington was the first president under the Constitution of the United States.
That's right.
Who helped elect Hanson? George Washington. Congress elected the presidents until we got a Constitution. So John Hanson was president for 1 year, and there were 5 or 6 more were president for 1 year. A president is a president. Y'all don't hear me, do you? So these white folk are mad. I told a white man last week, I said, this is not the first president. He said, I never heard that. I said, well, a whole lot you haven't heard, but this is true. This is true. It's a white lawyer, you know. He said, I'm supposed to know. I said, you're right, supposed to. We're right, supposed to know.
As we close out, would you talk a little bit about balancing ministry and married life? One of the issues for a lot of clergy is how to find that balance, and some issues for that.
Well, I've been a failure in that regard, to be honest with you. I was a workaholic. And a workaholic is just as guilty as an alcoholic. A workaholic is just as guilty as a gambleraholic. The Bible said, be temperate in how many things? All things. I worked all the time. Ate dinner around 10 o'clock at night, and just Saturday, Sunday, just worked all the time. So I should have balanced more work, family, work, rest, work, fellowship. But I didn't do that, but I should have. Now, my friends, please don't make my mistake. Balance it. I should have taken my family more into my vision, my counsel, my ups, my downs, my shouts, my victories. But I was from the old school. In the old school, the father was what? Silent. Silent. Unless he was disciplined, he was silent, but that's wrong. So I believe, but the Lord gave me a good wife, and I think that's the problem today is the Lord used to put us together. We got married in 1954, June. How many years is that? June of 54. Anybody live with me for 56 years? Has to be a saint. Because I'm no saint myself. Am I a saint myself, Reverend? We know each other, so and we tease each other, but I'm no saint. So she lived with me since 1954. Fine woman. The Lord had been with her. I saw a lady here today dating a preacher. I said, let's pray for this lady. She's dating a preacher. We try to balance the two together. And gentlemen, I was down in Nash County, Halifax County, and Reverend Sykes was down there. You all know Reverend Sykes? and a few others, and Reverend Sykes and Reverend Bowles' son. I said, gentlemen, do some cooking yourself. Don't put all the cooking on your wife. Now, I do cooking myself, but that's 10 or 15 years. I haven't done it as long as I should have. I'm talking about balancing. Mouth doesn't make a husband. Y'all don't hear me, do you? When your wife works like you and come in, you should go in that kitchen before she in her place or something. In other words, to balance it means you got to do something than talk or give orders or sit down and be waited on. You got to jump in there yourself. I'm talking about balancing it and be a part of the team. I cook now, one of the sorriest cooks ever known. Why? I didn't start in time. I don't have this cookbook for you. I got it for me. I guess my closing remarks would be, brother preachers, I didn't mention this in my failure, but I'll close on my failure. My failure in my 60 years was Christian education. That was my failure. I had more classes than any black preacher. I had greater youth programs and youth meetings than any black preacher. I taught more than any black preacher I knew. But I wasn't able to move the congregation. And you see, I've served several along the line of Christian education. Now, I had a year of Christian education at Boston University, so I'm no green person in it. That's one reason I know failure. Make yourself a student of preaching, but do root preaching. We got some of the, I shouldn't have said it though, we got some of the sorriest preaching going on today this side of heaven. I want to cry when I hear some of us preach because well, I'm not, y'all think I'm talking about y'all. I heard Harold Carter preach on TV. Big church in Baltimore. Mrs. Caldwell here would have whipped him.
Yeah.
Ms. Gibson, would have beat him. And I see a lot of you here who are not preachers, but y'all would have beat that. Harold Carter should have been whipped till he couldn't sit down. I'm not whispering. You can tell him I said it. Prepare your sermons that it's not just a shouting event, but it's also a learning event. In my closing, if they stood up and said, Brother Lynch, you're about through now, you got to go in. I said, well, I tell you what I got to go in with. This lady was sick, and her husband went to the New York church, white man. She said, well, husband, you don't have to stay here with me. She said, no, I'll let the child stay here with us. No, the child doesn't have to stay here with me either. The Lord will stay here with me. So while he was gone, she wrote out and showed it to him when he came back. Be not dismayed, whatever betide.
Yeah.
God will take care of you. That's what I want to close with. Beneath, love abide. God will.
Yeah.
Take care of you. All you ask. Nothing. He will.
Yes, he will.
He will. rock you to sleep at night. God will whisper in your ear and said the devil set a trap for you last night. God will wade with you through the deepest water. God will.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Walk beside you and help you carry the heaviest load. God will get there before you get there.
Yes, sir.
And fix it before you touch it. God will. God will. Pull you out of the muck. Pull you out of the mire. God will. When you go astray, he'll send the hound of heaven on your track. God will. God will. And when you come down to the river of Jordan, God will meet you down there.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
He will take care of you. Amen? Amen.